All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to our March webinar. I'm Dr. Randhawa, the founder and CEO of the Food Allergy Institute. As you all know, we try to have unique topics and unique guests on our webinar that we have every single month. And I think today's another unique guest that we have, and I'm really excited to have a conversation with him. It's the first time we've had another allergist on the conversation with us talking about all things food allergy and especially the future of food allergy care. So again, we're going to be really excited to talk to our guest today specifically about this topic. We have always committed ourselves to talking about all levels of conversation around the food allergy space. We have a lot of new concepts that are being developed through the Food Allergy Institute. As you all know, we launched a San Francisco site back in August of last year that's doing really well. As always, I'm proud to say that the same exact great work that started 20 years ago continues at that site. Same level of effectiveness, same level of safety, same level of outcomes. We are looking at expanding the Food Allergy Institute across many different approaches. We have announced recently that we're opening a site in the Northeast, basically New York City metro area. That will be opening in Q3 or consider it fall of 2026. That's a huge project for us to launch, and I know there's a lot of excited people interested in that build. We also have started an adult tip program that is specific to our headquarters here in Long Beach. These are patients up to age 50 years of age. And that's also a big change and a big shift in the healthcare space to offer this remission-inducing form of therapy now to individuals up to age 50. We've actually already started that enrollment process and already had the first number of patients start that program with us as well. And then lastly, we have this form of affiliate-based support from allergists that I will announce as we kind of go into this program. And that's something that we've been working on for a number of years. When I started this work, it was never my intention to do this work alone. It can't be done alone. There's just far too many people out there who suffer from life-threatening food allergies who deserve to have a chance at remission. We can do our work, through our corporate entity and all of the R&D that we do on an ongoing basis, but we need to partner with individuals and allergists across the U.S. and even across the globe to offer this to individuals who are at least circumferentially nearby. So that is our kind of high-level introduction to what we're going to be talking about today. I always like to give people some background on myself. This program is a direct result of my experience and my research interest and my training. I maintain 5 board certifications, which is a bit unusual, but my experience in that space across transplant, the ability to do solid organ transplants, really introduced myself to my approach towards the immune system and especially towards the concept of tolerance and tolerance induction. And when I first got involved in treating children with food anaphylaxis 20 years ago, it was that which inspired me to develop this program. And what it really reflects upon is the respect that is there for the complexity of food allergy. It is incredibly complex. For over 100 years. Many have attempted to try to really take on this condition with single approaches. So, a single approach, a single medication, a single approach. And ultimately, it didn't really result in the results that people were looking for. I knew that as a transplant immunologist that this is a complex disease. It's a complex immune system. And we had to find the systems to actually take that complexity on and ultimately resolve this condition and put patients into not only remission, but deep remission, really approaching what we call a curative state. So that's my background, for the last 20 years, and it's been really the work of my life. And as I mentioned earlier, we really wanted to find individuals who wanted to work with us over the last 10 to 15 years. And again, we're excited to announce our first affiliate site. So our guest today is actually our first affiliate allergist who's based out of the Dallas, Texas area, Dr. Waseem Imam, who he emailed me years ago and tried to start a conversation because he found what was going on here very interesting. But he's a board certified allergist. He's built up a very nice set of practices out in Dallas and has quite a bit of experience in the food allergy space. So I'd like to hand it off to him briefly, and you can please introduce yourself, give us your background, and maybe why you kind of went into the field of allergy.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's truly an honor to have this conversation with you. Yeah, my name is Dr. Waseem Imam. I'm a board certified allergist in pediatric and adult allergy, asthma, and immunology. I only have three board certifications. I'm board certified in obesity medicine, internal medicine, and the allergy immunology space. And I was always kind of fascinated in how humans are changing their environment, and then the environment changes are changing us as well in terms of new disease states that we're seeing, such as the increased prevalence of food allergies, asthma, of eczema, and seeing how our body's trying to navigate with that space, and then new therapies that we can come up with. So I found the allergy space to be fascinating from that perspective because it's one of the few specialties where you kind of have to be an expert in the environment and what the person's introducing into their body, and then simultaneously be an expert in how the body interacts with that substance. And it causes kind of a very interesting amount of events to occur. And you have to kind of approach this as a system approach, similar to what TIP does, as opposed to just trying to isolate variables that you can just tackle one by one.
Yeah, that's awesome. In your experience, in allergy immunology, how would you say it's just a high level question. How would you say your training, in fellowship training, I did fellowship training many more years before you, but I can tell you back then when I did fellowship training, we had almost zero exposure to food allergy. And then when I took my board exams, it was always I don't know, a couple of questions out of four or 500 questions, whatever it was on food allergy. What was your experience, at least from a training standpoint? I'm just curious what you saw.
Yeah, so I'd say the food allergy space actually is there's it's very new in terms of the disease states that we're appreciating and the diagnostics we have available to us. So we had just started getting component testing where we realized that a peanut isn't just a peanut. A peanut is, 17 different proteins and each of them act differently in the individual. And so we were just starting to get questions on how to navigate through component testing. And even with that, we found that most of the community allergists were not using component testing. They were still relying on the skin prick test, and they treated every peanut allergic patient or every milk allergic or every egg person like they were the same person, without realizing that that one person might have had a different framework in how they got the allergy and what the component was, and kind of isolating that. We also had no biologics in the space that just like, we had Zolar for a while. So there was Zolar, but then there's an explosion in different biologics and how those interact with food allergies, whether or not they help treat food allergies. Those are all kind of that wasn't really there or discussed on the space. When I first started doing any type of food therapy was considered a negative thing to even attempt. OIT was still seen negatively. Even OIT was seen negatively. There were no studies on slit. There was no studies on any attempt with epicutaneous. There wasn't even an attempt, I feel like, in the training to even approach food allergies. There's no cure, there's no treatment, EpiPen and avoid forever. And that was just how the space was at the time.
Yeah. And I think you and I have probably at least a decade plus between our training times. And that's just really how slow kind of medicine moves sometimes, right? Despite the desperate needs of, 35 million people, and despite there actually being some advancements, right? It's just not even brought up into training, which I find, absolutely fascinating. But no, thank you for that,
Mhm.
that feedback. I wanted just to kind of talk about this with you directly, Dr. Mom, which is, just how you see food allergies as a whole. Again, I obviously have lived in this world for in a different way for a long period of time, but just as an allergist, you obviously know that this is a growing, problem, and it's a problem that all too often doesn't get talked about. But in your practice, just maybe it's across the pediatric and the adult space, what are you seeing? Like, do you see the numbers going up? Do you see like people getting diagnosed in ways that, or I should say, having new symptoms in ways that you haven't seen before? What's your experience been?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I would say even for the adults, we're seeing a lot of food pollen syndrome that's increased substantially, and that's really affected their quality of life. So a person is trying to eat healthier, for example, suddenly eat a salad and half the salad is burning in their mouth. So even just from the food pollen space, we find a significant burden there. In the food allergy space, we're starting to see the pediatric population as the prevalence increases, starting to become adults, and now they're starting to deal with new challenges they didn't foresee. So, a person, for example, applying for the military who's anaphylactic to peanuts, trying to get an exemption, for example, or a person who is having a wedding, for example, and they don't know what dishes they can bring. They wanna have a right away of food to have, but at the same time, they're allergic to half the food there, so they don't know how they're going to interact with it. So really seeing that transition has been really new for me because I saw a lot of kids that had food allergies, but now you're starting to see those kids become adults, and those adults have food allergies. And when you bring up things like tip, for example, they're like, wow, if I had that when I was younger, I wouldn't have had to deal with all this now that I'm getting older. Traveling, foods are not labeled the same way in other countries, and a lot of different ethnicities might have different culinary backgrounds where everything's cross-contaminated. So people don't appreciate that. They were just avoiding the food when they were young, but now this child is in college and trying to travel and study abroad, and now it's becoming a burden for them. So I'm seeing the prevalence of allergies going up, but also because they're aging with the allergy, I'm seeing more patients from multiple different age ranges and the different challenges they're dealing with depending on the age that they're in at the moment.
Yeah, no, well said. I think it's a over different age groups, and I'd even go into like folks in their 30s and 40s and even 50s, where they, were eating something for quite some period of time, took a little bit of time off from that food, and then now are having early, evidence of allergy, and then potentially, those reactions are progressing, and now they carry an EpiPen. How about the other side of this? This is, I always tell people, this is the side that I didn't understand. My kids don't have food allergies. I really did not know much about it in the earliest phase of my career. And then when I finally had my first person complete tip, way, way back, I was just really happy that this patient could consume extremely large amounts of allergen without any sort of symptoms, that their molecular data looked amazingly good. And all this guy told me or would talk to me about is how, socially, it's a day and night difference. It's, from a time constraint standpoint and a planning standpoint, what a huge difference. And I didn't understand the social emotional kind of burden that these patients have to carry, right? That's kind of when I first opened my eyes. How much of that have you seen, in your practice dealing with these young kids and older patients?
Right. So, in practice, my kids are a little bit younger. So my kids are actually still going to, I have as young as daycare where I notice that they have peanut-free zones in the daycare, and we have to make sure we don't have tree nuts in their lunches, and they're not supposed to share food anymore. So to even see just how my kids are, the culture is changing where we used to be like, we wanted to share lunches when we were growing up, but now we actively have to tell the kids don't share lunches because you don't know who's allergic in the same room as you. That's kind of opened up my eyes to how much of a burden it is. And I can tell you that because my friends are also having children. I'm getting more and more questions just from, hey, my child has eczema and they have this new food allergy. What do I do about this? I didn't know there was anything else. They went to a local allergist. They just gave them an EpiPen and they did nothing else. And they felt kind of unsupported in this space. So just from a social standpoint, even outside of my clinic, I do notice the food allergy burden. I notice it when I go to restaurants, and now the waiter always asks, does anyone here have a food allergy? And that wasn't a question I used to get asked like 5 years ago. And so that just kind of like always reminds me that we're social, we're a social animal. We eat together, we bond around food, and it isolates the person when that happens. It can be very isolating, and that definitely has a burden. And I think there was a study that quantified it where they were looking at quality adjusted years of life. And they noticed that about 20% of it's lost with the person with food allergy per year. So it's equivalent to almost losing 3 months of the feeling of perfect health per year. I think a lot of times the families adjust to it. They don't really realize how much of an effort they put. But when you follow the moms and you kind of ask them how they adjust the meals, what they do with eating out, what they do with birthday parties, what they do with traveling, you notice that there is a significant cognitive load being kind of focused on this burden. So I'm starting to appreciate it more and more, and especially as just an individual as opposed to just an allergist as well. Just seeing how my friends have to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, there was a nice study done a decade plus ago looking at a handful of different chronic conditions and type 1 diabetics, which, that's a hard disease. I mean, you're injecting yourself with insulin, or you have a pump, and that pump stays in for, 3 to 5 days at a time, and you're having to count your carbs, and you have to make some adjustments on your insulin, et cetera. Their quality of life was much better than that of someone who suffers from food allergies. I mean, that's literally how the shift was, if you can imagine, that kind of difference. But ultimately, like I said, that is what these patients and families have to live with on an ongoing basis. And that's why, really, this approach to kind of understanding what is food allergy treatment in 2026, how does it get better? What else can we do? That's kind of why I wanted to particularly talk to you and say, all right, look, you've had your lived experience. How do you see it? So we'll just kind of go right down here on this list of questions, right? So in 2026, kind of based on your experience as an active allergist, how do you diagnose food allergies when patients come in to see you?
Yeah, so food allergies is really complicated compared to other diseases like high cholesterol or high blood pressure, where it's just one number, and if you're above it or below it, it kind of tells you whether or not you're in the disease state. The food allergy space is a lot more of like a network effect where you have to look at the individual, look at the skin prick testing, look at the blood testing, and then you kind of do this detective story where you combine together and then you decide on whether or not you think the probability is high. In essence, a lot of allergists, when they're diagnosing, they're really doing a probability assessment of the person, and then they're just assessing how likely is it that they're going to have a reaction. So the way we diagnose food allergies up until we met you at the Food Allergy Institute was that essentially it was a skin prick test, the history of the patient, and then a blood test as well, and possibly component testing. And essentially, we're just pretty much doing this back of the map napkin analysis on what the probability is the food allergy exists, given that the person might have had a reaction to it, given that the person might have the correct blood markers and a positive skin prick test. So that's pretty much the essence of how we diagnose the food allergy. And then before that, it used to be avoidance, and now we can go through like how the different treatment options have evolved.
What are your thoughts on, I mean, it's interesting, like about 10 years ago, a very, well, I wouldn't say popular, but something that was relatively mainstream in an academic allergy was just bring the patient in, regardless of test results, and just do a food challenge to see what happens.
Mhm.
Is that something that you've seen or done, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, in terms of doing a food challenge to diagnose the food allergy.
Yeah.
I think there was one of the I think the Ramses study which showed they were starting OIT and they didn't do food challenges and they didn't find that there was any need to do the food challenge. There was no difference in the results between doing the food challenge or not doing the food challenge. So you just kind of like expose the patient to another reaction really for no reason because we're pretty good if you combine enough data points to diagnose the food allergy. They will present that there's a gold standard to do the food challenge, but that's assuming usually looking at one metric. If you actually do a pretty good history, do a good ingestion, you look at all the other foods they're able to consume and not consume, and then you do the blood testing and you look at components specifically, you pretty much get a pretty good result. And I would argue that probably even better than the food challenge because you might be below threshold with the food challenge, or you might have not aggravated them sufficiently because a person might pass the food challenge in your clinic and then go to a wedding, eat some shrimp, and then dance, and then all of a sudden they react when you told them they weren't allergic because you didn't stress them out sufficiently during the test to really guarantee that they weren't allergic. So I think that sometimes actually a food challenge can fool you, depending on the food and depending on what the state the person was in during the food challenge itself.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think it's tricky, right? And ultimately, what we're discussing here is the fact that we don't have a singular kind of test or assay that will, give us a 90% accuracy on saying, yeah, you definitely have a peanut allergy or not. And indeed, that's kind of what, was the first thing that I worked on when I built this program was we have to have better diagnostics. And with really, really good diagnostics through machine learning and AI, you can get to that kind of mid 90% range or even, and ultimately that gives us, kind of the success of what next steps look like. What treatment options does your clinic like? I guess I know obviously we're working together now, but like how did you look at food allergy previously? What did you offer patients?
So before we did attempt offering OIT and we did offer food slit therapy as well. The OIT, I guess the issue is the objective. Usually when we're doing OIT or when you look at the OIT studies, the objective is bite-proof protection. There's almost no OIT study where the objective was getting to a dose that the person could consume it, have food freedom, and remove the other burdens that they might have been coming for, like social isolation, not carrying an EpiPen around. The food slit was similar to that, where we would do the food slit and the goal was bite-proof protection. They both had their limitations. They had benefits in which the food slit might have been a little bit more convenient and a little less risky, but then the payoff is a little bit less as well. The amount of food that they consume is a lot less. It's just really bite-proof protection. And then often without challenging them, you don't actually know where they are. So they could be in the therapy for a while and you're not really sure during the therapy, you've been doing this for a year, is it working? You don't really know unless you challenge them to see how much they can consume. With OIT, the problem is that it's quite limiting. When you do the OIT, you have to have like 3 hours of rest period afterwards. So it's hard to get a child and kind of design it in a way where they can eat it and they always have that rest period. And if they're sick, which kids get sick all the time, if they're at school, if you get a viral infection, you have to drop the dose. And despite doing everything correct, you can still have a pretty high side effect burden or GI side effects that could occur as well. So the OIT, for the most part, parents had a hard time sticking to it. Kids had a hard time sticking to it, and the payoff sometimes wasn't worth it. When the parents would come and say, "This is a lot of effort. What am I going to get out of this at the end?" And you're like, "Well, maybe. Well, they won't have a life-threatening reaction if they consume one or two or three peanuts." For some people, that's really like that's good enough. But later on, it's like, well, this is a lot of commitment. You can never skip a dose. You can never skip a day for a payoff that might not be as great as they wanted originally.
And when you were conducting OIT, how often did patients come back into your clinic, like for
Um,
updoses and all that?
Yeah, so they would come in every 2 to 4 weeks for updose. So usually there was a rapid escalation day, similar to what the trial does with Palfosia, for example. There's a rapid escalation day, and then they come back every 1 to 2 weeks. One of the other issues that occurs is that a lot of the food therapies are they should be a system, and in reality, they're trying to do a one-time intervention when they should actually be a whole systemic approach. And you have to just measuring the peanut protein and making sure it's correct, or getting it's very difficult to do with standard OIT. With Pafosia, you can open it up and pour it in with a vehicle, such as applesauce or something like that. But usually we'd updose them every 2 weeks to 4 weeks. But there's so many variables that they don't take into account. So does the child have eczema that's going to get flared up? Does the child have allergic rhinitis? And in springtime they were tolerating it. Suddenly they're not tolerating it in the springtime because you didn't adjust for that, or you didn't take that into consideration. So sometimes we'd have to space them out maybe every 2, 3 months, but for the most part, it was very difficult for them to maintain it on long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. When I started my work a long time ago, OIT had I'd say barely had just started. And what I found is that over time, like there was like many different kind of types of OIT in a sense. Like there was like slightly different strategies here, slightly different strategies there. But much of what you describe has still kind of become the issue, right? Which is, there's generally speaking, most allergists don't offer it. Number one, the vast majority don't offer OIT. Number two, if they offer it, it's relatively restrictive. Like, if you have, moderate asthma or severe asthma, they generally disqualify that. If you have eczema, that's difficult to control out. If you have any type of EOE, that's like a full, non-starter. And beyond, if you have any other medical conditions, those things are very limiting. And I think to your point, when OIT is then done long term, what does the end look like? What are your goals? What is that, shared value between, allergist and patient? How does that actually look? Is kind of what has led to a point where it becomes a difficult thing to offer. And I'll say one last thing, which is I can only speak for Southern California, where there's a lot of big box healthcare in Southern California, meaning big systems come in. And when big systems come in and take over allergy clinics, the first thing to go is OIT. They actually say, no, you're just not doing this anymore, because it is extremely time consuming, it's labor intensive, and it potentially has risks that they just don't like, which, that's just the lay of the land as it stands. What are your thoughts on Palforzia, especially given that now effective July 1, it's not going to be manufactured anymore?
Right. I think that was expected. I think that the thing with food allergies, when someone's coming in to treat a food allergy, when you do standard OIT, you're essentially asking them to pick the food. And then you go in kind of in that order. When you start with peanut, peanut is not always 100% the main concern, even though it's the most common food allergy, but milk, egg, wheat can be a lot more debilitating for the person socially and way more restrictive. So I expected that if you just had one, that you were doing all that effort for one food and you have all these other foods, then there'd be a high quit rate because eventually, well, you didn't really decrease their burden. If they have 3 or 4 food allergies and one of the three are gone, they're still reading all the labels, they're still carrying the EpiPen around, they're still worried about reactions. So I expected that to be one problem with it. The other is the studies themselves kind of show the limitation in food allergy, that food allergies, we think of it sometimes as one disease, but it's sometimes several diseases at once. It's one person might have got the food allergy from their gut, one person might got it from their nose, one person might get it from their skin. And when you're approaching the food allergy, you really have to kind of decide on retraining the immune system from a holistic standpoint, making sure the asthma is controlled, the allergic rhinitis is controlled, the eczema is controlled. And I didn't find that that was really taken into consideration. They look at those like their core morbid conditions, right? So they have a food allergy plus they have eczema. They have a food allergy plus they have asthma. But there's no consideration of the idea that, well, the reaction to the food is going to happen because of the asthma, or the food allergy occurred because of the eczema. So it's really this like this network-like effect. Multiple things are interacting with the immune system, and you're really hitting this moving target. So you have a young person, and they hit puberty. Suddenly, their immune system changes. Suddenly, they were responding. They're not responding anymore. They have a new food allergy. They got a new pet, and all of that's not responding. And I found that it was going to probably not be. They were trying to scale and standardize something that I think fundamentally requires personalization. And I kind of expected it not to work that well.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And unfortunately, for the estimated 1,000 people plus who are on it nationwide, effective July 1st, they don't have a transition plan. Which
Mhm.
again, I just think that's a sign of that's a bigger problem I have with pharma, kind of the pharma, classical pharma and FDA approach, but we won't get into that today. I wanted to talk about OIT, especially from your perspective, something you've been a part of and conducted in the past. You've already mentioned some of these points, but I guess, what has or let me ask you a different question. So when you started OIT, how did you like decide what protocol to follow, or, how did you learn it essentially?
Right. So originally there's protocols that just kind of like circulate within the allergy space, similar to what Pathosia did, which is a rapid escalation day, and then you start moving up. What they're mimicking essentially penicillin desensitization originally. That's what it seemed like when they first developed the protocols. When you're doing a drug allergy, you're essentially trying to brute force overwhelm the immune system in such a way that it's stunned from reacting. And that's why if you're doing OIT and you stop the OIT on a Monday and you reconsume the food by Wednesday, you're re-allergic by Wednesday. And that's essentially because of that brute force where the immune system had a chance to reset. And that desensitization is not exactly what patients are looking for, nor is it that's a lot of what causes the side effects. The side effects are being caused by only approaching it from this brute force perspective. So that's kind of like the impression I got, that it's just a lot like treating a drug. And if you do a penicillin desensitization, if somebody has like an infection and they're allergic to penicillin, we can desensitize them, but it's only temporary. Once you stop the penicillin, if they get infected again a month later, you have to restart the desensitization. And that's kind of how the food, and then why that locked in, why that became the only route, I'm not sure. It seemed like it was more logical to precondition the immune system to accept the food as opposed to just trying to brute force it, especially when it's something that you obviously will interrupt sometimes. You can't just consume peanut every day forever. So,
Yeah, totally agree. I guess maybe another question is this idea of multi-food OIT. I don't know if you ever had experience with that, but what have you seen, and what are your thoughts on that model?
I think there might be something they're trying out with like 11 foods at once, but typically in the OIT space, they might try to do multiple foods at once. Sometimes the foods are related, like maybe a tree nut, two different types of tree nuts simultaneously. But they might not be taking into effect that those tree nuts might cross react versus just doing one food at a time. Typically, when they do multiple food OIT, it's a similar rule that you do the food together, then you still have the 3 hour wait together. They kind of are forced to do it because if you're trying to do two foods simultaneously with a 3 hour wait time, then essentially you have 6 hours of the day where you're kind of stuck because of the multiple foods at once. I think the multi-food, it's a logical step because of the peanut. It's logically that if you're doing OIT to one food, then you should probably consider 2 or 3 foods simultaneously just to make it more convenient for the person. But it runs into the same problems, and then if you have a reaction, you don't know what food caused the reaction, so you're always confused. So you just kind of assume. But usually, if they do multiple foods simultaneously, they have to drop all the foods together, and maybe one was working and one wasn't, but you don't know which is which because you dropped them all simultaneously.
Yeah. And again, that I can imagine that's got to be frustrating for the office, for your team, right? Of like, how do what's next look like? And, I can tell you, like 15 years ago when OIT was kind of in its earliest phases, what I saw is most allergists had a very small number of OIT patients. I mean, it was like
Mhm.
maybe a single busy office would have like 20 to 30 patients.
Mhm.
I'm not sure where it's at today, but I mean, at least again, as I mentioned, at least in Southern California, a lot of the OIT efforts are going away. I'm not sure what other allergists are seeing as far as volume, but it's just incredibly time consuming, and you almost have to put a whole large team together just to make it even work at the level it
Yeah.
does.
When we go to food allergy conferences, we notice the numbers of allergists that attend them dwindle over time. They're not always, it's not something that's expanding in people who want to start to offer it. You're right. You kind of need a separate team. The food allergy, in terms of the allergy shots that allergists really focus on and testing for seasonal allergies and asthma and all that stuff, that takes a lot of time. And the food allergy space, if you just have it kind of as a ancillary add-on, it's very difficult to do that because that requires its own organization, its own metrics. It's very difficult to just have it as an add-on.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Well, so I want to switch here from OIT to tip, and we'll kick it off just with a quick video, and we'll talk right on the other side of this.
Welcome to the Food Allergy Institute's Tolerance Induction Program, or TIP. Today, we'll take a journey inside the human body to see how TIP works at a cellular level. If a person with food allergies consumes a food allergen, a process known as anaphylactic reaction begins in the mouth. and continues through the gastrointestinal tract. Below the gut lining, the food allergen interacts with specific lymphocytes and dendritic cells to initiate an anaphylactic reaction. Subsequently, cells such as mast cells and basophils release chemicals including histamine and tryptase. This immune system response leads to life-threatening symptoms such as swelling, hives, and difficulty breathing. TIP aims to retrain the immune system to induce tolerance to these allergens. TIP utilizes biosimilar proteins. Such biosimilar proteins are based on protein sequence and evolutionary class. The immune system recognizes these proteins as similar. As one biosimilar protein interacts with the immune system, dendritic cells in the gut will start the process of downregulating the allergic response to the primary allergen. Over time, with each new biosimilar protein, the immune system turns down the immune system response to all biosimilar proteins related to the primary allergen. Biosimilar proteins influence B cells and T cells to interact. The interaction results in a reduction in specific IgE antibodies and an increase in specific IgG subclass antibodies. The antibody switching during TIP immunotherapy ultimately affects the entire gastrointestinal tract and body, allowing the individual to consume an unlimited amount of that allergen without the concern of a reaction. With ongoing treatment and artificial intelligence biodata monitoring, TIP can lead to long-term remission, allowing individuals to enjoy a non-allergic life, enjoying an unrestricted diet without the fear of severe allergic reactions. Long-term remission in TIP allows the biosimilar protein immunotherapy to be dosed every 2 to 4 weeks, allowing for convenience while enjoying an unlimited diet.
So that's, we call it a mechanism of action type video, but basically it's an explanation of kind of what TIP is at its core. Clearly, it envelops the entire complexity of this disease state. And the benefit of TIP, which Dr. Imam has also seen as he's visited our primary headquarters sites, is that it is built on all levels of science, right? I mean, we've done this at the molecular research laboratory side, the cellular research laboratory side, all the way to the food laboratory and the ability to produce proteins that are going to actually induce the work that we're doing. In addition, applied mathematics, machine learning, and AI to make sure all this complexity can be organized, forecasted, and achieve the result in the most efficient way possible. And that's what TIP does. Ultimately, our goal has always been the same for every single patient. The goal is every single patient reaches remission. They're able to consume an unlimited amount of their primary allergen without restriction, and they do so on 7, 14, 21, and 30-day cycles. And that's it. That's what we've done for, really now for the better part of 20 years. The benefit is we take on very complicated cases. That's always been the case from day one. We have patients who have everything from mast cell disorders to transplants to inflammatory bowel disease, you name it. And as long as we understand the anatomy of the patient and we understand the way their immune system operates, we can find ways to allow TIP to occur despite all of these different comorbidities. We also take patients who have very severe reactions and very severe allergic values. The vast majority of our patients have values of 100 or more to their primary allergen, and that's just what we do every single day. As I mentioned earlier, we've now expanded this up to age 50 years of age, which is a big win for the adult population who often has not had any other significant opportunity to receive some form of food allergy-based treatment. Our system involves zero guesswork. This is a program that is operating upon trillions and trillions of data points. This has now been over 20 years with 28,000 patients through our system. And what this allows us to do is to take a brand new patient, have them do a single blood draw, run about 400 parameters or 400 analytes into a system that will create a proper diagnosis. What are you anaphylactic to? What are you not anaphylactic to? We'll also then predict the safest path for you to get to the end of the program. And in fact, that path has a predicted timeline to it, which is, again, very, very rare to see in modern medicine. And lastly, we're able to identify not only their biosimilar proteins, but actually the sequence of events that will take those biosimilar proteins, allowing them to downregulate the primary immune response and allow the patient to achieve food freedom, be able to hit remission, be able to consume those foods without restriction. This is maintained doing annual blood work for a few years. Once patients are in deep enough remission, we do space that annual testing out for more years of time. I'm most proud and absolutely most proud of our safety rates. If you, again, we publish our safety rates on our website. I encourage anyone to go take a look at that. And that's something that no pharma company does, and frankly, no hospital system does either, right? And frankly, they should. I mean, if you believe in what you're doing, you should publish your positives and publish your negatives as well. Our reaction rate is well under 1%. And if you look at our food challenges, if you look at other studies that have been done, most academic places that do a lot of food challenges, they have a reaction rate of roughly 25 to 35%. This means that they were not thinking the patient would react, but 1 in 4 are going to have a major reaction anyway. We do about 900 food challenges before we see one single symptom of reaction, and that's a big difference in numbers and a big difference in safety. We provide 24/7 command center support. We have an entire team. This is physicians, providers, nurses on 24/7, 365 to support our patients despite having a very low reaction rate. And what that means is if anybody has a problem for any level of detail that exists, we're going to get those patients right back on track. And often we're doing that in a matter of hours, not days or weeks. And that's the dedication and support that we have for our patients. We've done that again since day one. And lastly, we have this root cause approach. And as Dr. Imam was discussing, we do look at the whole system. We're looking at the lungs, we're looking at the GI tract, we're looking at the skin. We're trying to understand all aspects and we're collecting data on that. And ultimately, that allows us to not only do this safely and effectively, but as we control their food allergies, we're also going to control their lungs, control their hay fever, control their skin, and control their EOE or other conditions as well. So we're really proud of the long-term results that we have of all these other comorbid conditions, as we call them, because not only do they leave this program without food allergies, they also have significant improvement in all of those other systems that can be involved. So that's what TIP is. Again, TIP is something that has tested, or I should say, passed the test of time, which is a big deal. And that means we have patients who are out in TIP in remission basically 20 years. That is a pretty remarkable feat itself. In addition, we are putting about 2 to 3 patients in remission per day, every single day. And if you ever visit any of our centers, you hear these big celebrations, call them our food freedom celebrations. It's a wonderful thing to see. And that is just a reflection of what we're getting done, on an ongoing basis. I was now wanting to just bring Dr. Imam back into this and say, I guess, what about TIP did you find, I'd say, most interesting at the start? Like, what about it was kind of captured your mind to say, this is something I want to pursue?
Yeah, so essentially the objective itself was amazing. The objective of food freedom, that you're going to eat as much as you want, whenever you want, with no restrictions whatsoever. And it was, I had a few patients who were in the program, and just noticing that, I'm like, well, how are you going to get there? And then I thought of every problem that could be possible. Well, how are you going to do the adherence? What are you going to find the foods? And I just found that the TIP program solved every single one of them from beginning to end. It figured out what the cross-reactive proteins were, how to obtain the cross-reactive proteins, how to process them, how to make it convenient for the patient, how to have a call center if there's reactions, if there's any confusions. The TIP, I know the video mentioned kind of the biosimilar approach, and that's really innovative. But to me, every single aspect of it was innovative. The entire system of it, how it approaches the immune system, and how it approaches the immune system from the molecular level, but also from the behavioral level. From how do you get the individual to have an easy time to do this? How do you, whether it be like the gummy bears, and how you obtain the foods, and the wait times, and how you do the challenges. Every single aspect was geared, and then all these internal buffers were placed within it. It was just, honestly, it's a work of art to see it, like, logistically how it achieves that goal. Because then on top of that, just the whole molecular basis of it, of why would you not precondition the immune system for this condition? And honestly, it's because the studies can't last as long as you're doing TIP. So they're just ignored. They just try to brute force it within 6 months, as opposed to saying, okay, what does this person need, as opposed to what's the most convenient for the average amount of patients, that ignores the people on the peripheries.
Yeah. No, I mean, and to your point, right? I mean, when I first started this work, again, I'm a well-published person. I've well over 100 publications, peer-reviewed in many of my different specialties. And when initially, I presented this idea, this is going back to like 2008 at one of the main academy conferences, there were like no responses. Nobody even asked a question, because they were like, what are you talking about? Nobody even understood the concept. And then fast forward another 4 or 5 years, instead of individuals being curious about it, they actually pushed back heavily and was like, no, nobody else is asking those questions. Nobody else is doing this. Therefore, we're not interested.
Hmm.
And so I guess, I mean, it's a question we actually put up here, which is, it's an interesting point that people bring up, which is, well, there's not enough peer-reviewed publications about tip. Like, how would you answer that question? When it comes to peer review and food allergy as a whole, what are your thoughts on that?
Right. So I think that there's a confusion on how the studies are done. The studies are all about isolating variables, and with something like TIP, you have so many variables that you are treating simultaneously. So I don't want to confuse it with the science. Every single thing that's happening is based by science. You could quote studies on every single thing along the system on why you do certain things, whether it be the near epitopes or the biosimilar proteins. Those biosimilars are all evidence based. You can find them. There's databases where you can find that these are biosimilar proteins. How the immune system desensitizes itself, whether it be how the B cell or the Th2 cell desensitizes itself, and how they vary. Um, all of that's scientifically based. But the real question they're asking is, well, the outcomes, but what variable will you isolate? The studies in the peer review process is not really geared towards personalized medicine in general. So when there's any personalized approach, then it becomes very difficult because there's this conflict on what is the average like, what is the average patient. That's what the peer review process is looking for. It's looking what is the average patient, what is the average therapy, and how likely is the therapy to work. And it's trying to standardize everything. And it's very difficult to do. A food allergy patient with eczema is very different than a food allergy patient with allergic rhinitis. And two peanut protein patients could be allergic to different peanut proteins. So I actually, like, if you ask me to figure out how to publish it, I actually don't know what variable I would isolate that wouldn't destroy the program altogether, because the program is attacking all variables simultaneously.
Yeah, and that's I'm glad you brought that up because ultimately, and we have published many of our outcomes including the top journals in allergy and the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology. And when I would present this to these reviewers, I would tell them point blank, look, I will only pick one outcome, and that outcome is going to be a remission outcome. So these patients have passed dairy or the past peanut or whatever it was, and there was no pushback on that. They're like, that's great. But then they'd start to ask, like, well, what are all these dynamic levers that are going on? And and I was like, well, there's no way to put that in an article. That you can't even put that in a 1,000-page book, right? I mean, this is not something that's that simple. But ultimately, I believe this is a reflection of kind of where big data is going in medicine. Because, fortunately, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, but you can now go into other areas like cardiology, radiology, and such where now, because they are using a lot of machine learning into their systems, the peer review process has changed and said, yes, we actually like N of one type studies, where we're looking at one patient and one outcome. Because ultimately, if you had the disease at the beginning, which no one's going to argue, and now at the end there's no evidence of that disease being present, that is an outcome that's worth looking at. And so that's just kind of fascinating how science is changing, really as this whole process moves along. Maybe last question for you on this, at least on this particular topic, is how do you see TIP like working with allergy practices? I mean, it's kind of what we're discussing and what you're going to about to launch here very soon. How do you see it fitting in, and how did you kind of come to that conclusion?
Right. So we are probably, in our practice, we're probably separating the allergy from the food aspect in terms of really giving the patients with the food allergy their own attention in order to help navigate them through the program. There's obviously other conditions like asthma and allergic rhinitis and eczema that would need a community allergist in order to partake and help treat those. It's very difficult to travel just for those conditions, and often they need follow up, whether it be school forms or refill on inhalers and things like that. What are the concerns is that just that the community allergist is aware that the food allergy therapy is going on, so that they don't mistakenly interfere with the process by using the wrong biologic, for example, or doing some type of therapy that might throw off the results for the food allergy. I think that the food allergy is very safe to do with the treatment for eczema and asthma and everything like that, except for we just make sure the other party is aware not to intervene or not to substitute anything while the therapy is going on.
Yeah, and again, I think, what I've always tried to do here is figure out how to empower, allergists to say, look, you know what, you can find a space in your practice to offer this tip. Let it be controlled, right? Let it be its own system because, tip is obviously a highly centralized, highly logistical system, but it needs to be deployed in places where patients can go. And ultimately, if you can offer that service line, and of course, participate in the general care of the patient, make sure that everything's going well, and communicate with, with the Food Allergy Institute as its primary, it's a win-win for everybody, right? It gets patients what they need. Allergists now get to participate in this process and really see the great outcomes that these patients have. And to me, that's the ultimate goal.
Oh.
Just a few more questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
When you kind of look at comparing food allergy treatment options, what kind of questions, should be asked about the program? I mean, these are some of the things we've already talked about, so maybe we can just talk about it at a high level. If you're a parent and you're considering any form of food allergy therapy, and really the statistics are quite interesting that really only about 1% of the entire food allergy population is even thinking about some form of treatment. They're just kind of, I don't know if they are not aware, but they are generally saying, you know what, this is a scary condition. But only 1% are saying, I'm going to go pursue something. So if you're one of those parents who happens to have a kid with food allergies, or you're a young adult with food allergies, how would you go about assessing treatment options, and how you would maybe take it the next step?
Yeah, so I would just kind of reinforce that the food allergy treatment is a system, not just a therapy that you're going to undergo. So the system has to be in place. The doctor might be really smart, but if there's not a logistical system on how they schedule, how they get you in, how they what they're going to do, what's the plan from kind of beginning to end, and then if there's any hiccups along the way, are you prepared for those hiccups? That's kind of the most important thing about how you approach the food allergy space in general, because the reactions are not going to happen in the office. If there's going to be reactions and if there's complications, you're going to need to have somebody to call. And if a person's kind of just off on the weekends, then it might be more difficult to approach the space in that way.
Agreed. And I think these are just, these are questions that we accumulated from families that we've surveyed and said, hey, how did you go about deciding what to do?
Mhm.
And these are some of the questions that they asked, which is there a support system in place? And kind of to your point, right? If you're a solo practitioner in allergy, or maybe you have a small group, most allergists don't necessarily have after hours call and weekends calls. So that kind of support mechanism may be limited in that sense. Second is, how many patients have you treated and what's the success rate? Again, we're very clear about what our success rates are. We are doing this not only because we feel it's the right thing to do from a transparency standpoint, but every patient is under informed consent in our program. And that means we're under regulation to actually produce this information at any given time. That's something that I think is unique to us. Third is, what is the reaction rate in the program? Again, I'll tell you, I'm sure you'd agree with this, that most practices are not actually calculating a reaction rate. It's just kind of hit or miss. Like, oh yeah, we had one, a couple this week or whatever that week, but no one's actually tracking it long term. And to me, that's difficult, because if you don't know what your reaction rate is, you don't know how to make your program better, right? And that's something that's the beauty of our system, where we have constant access to data. That's something that we're continuously building upon. How do you assess that a therapy is working? As you mentioned earlier, right? Like, you don't quite know in the world of OIT when, okay, is it enough? Is it bite-proof? Is it working? What do I do next? And there's just not a real algorithm to try to figure that out. At least in TIP, we have very clear data to know when it's working, when you go to the next step, ultimately when you hit remission, how you move to deep remission, and how that continues to improve over time. So being able to forecast is, I think, a very key point, and a key point to our level of success. How long does a treatment program last? That's another one. Like, we generally will forecast on a number of visits when you're going to be done with TIP. I'm assuming that in OIT and other things, that's pretty much a hard thing to figure out, right? I mean, what is your experience been on that one?
No, we have no idea. When you do OIT or SLIT, you just have no idea what the outcome is going to be when you start. There's no quantitative measure. There's nothing like that. You just kind of assume it. Assume how bad the reaction was. Assume how difficult it is to updose, and that's it.
Absolutely. And what will life look like once completing the program? We know one thing, and that is, when patients hit remission, they can eat whatever they want, whenever they want. I'd say, if you look at overall our patients, roughly 2/3 of them actually eat a fully open diet. It's quite impressive. They eat like a pure non-allergic person. They're consuming all tree nuts, peanuts, all your top allergens and beyond. The 1/3 are kind of slow to adapt, is what I call them. They're saying, I don't really want to eat this stuff, and they'll do their weekly maintenance or biweekly maintenance, monthly maintenance, whatever. But interestingly, over time, as they age, they start to adapt a non-allergic lifestyle. So, I'm not sure what those factors are, something we should probably continue to study, but we do have a clear idea of what life does look like once you finish the program. And then, other questions from a treating allergist perspective is, are you formally trained in food allergy therapy? Kind of like we talked about earlier, it's not really offered as part of training in fellowship. So most folks are, if they're, I mean, I know there's a couple programs in the nation that may offer some food allergy training, but it's not the majority, certainly. And then really it's kind of self-training. And at least for our system and what we do, and then even as you launch TIP in your office, there's going to be a high level of support and training that goes on in that system. And to me, that's critical. In fact, that's probably one of the most critical things that we do. Our providers and physicians who are on site for our activities, they're usually taking 75 to 90 modules specific training in food allergy, and then that is repeated on an ongoing basis to make sure that they're up to date, they're tracking everything, and their level of knowledge really does reflect that. And then I think, which allergens do you have experience treating? I've definitely seen that some allergists only treat a few proteins, a few food allergens. They don't necessarily open it up to everything. Obviously, here we are open to all allergens that are known. So far, we haven't found any that we don't know, although we are looking at a few. There's an interesting one called these anthocyanins, which are found in let's call it in the skin of dark fruits and vegetables, which are known to be an early food allergen. It's something we're studying in our lab, but we do see these patients come in and they'll consume, certain beans or things like blackberries and have what is a pretty clear reaction. But, so this is something that when we're not only involved in the common allergens or the top allergens, we go way beyond, and we're also on the cutting edge of trying to identify the newest allergens that exist. So that's the beauty of having a fully encompassed system that we have as present. So I do want to also announce, something that we have not really discussed publicly, but this is our program and system called Cybus.ai. This is our AI platform. This AI platform has been in development now for the better part of a decade. This is the AI platform that allows several things to happen. Number one, it allows us to have a large data cloud of continuous connected information, all under proper security and all under de-identified processes that allow us to know what's going on with our patients, that allows us to make sure our system is only getting better at diagnosis, better at treatment, and better at long-term remission. This system also operates on our patient-facing side. So this is considered our electronic medical record system, but it's actually far beyond that because it's not a typical electronic medical record system. It's an active thinking machine learning system that actually works with the physicians and providers to make sure that everything's on track, that if adjustments need to be made, those things are happening within this singular system. This is also part of our patient app that is already being rolled out now. That patient app is tied to this system, and this is, again, a live ecosystem network of data that, again, I'd compare it to kind of like banking, right? If you have a banking app and you kind of do something on your app, you know that it's updated in your central bank system. That type of thing in healthcare is unheard of, but that's what we're doing here. So as things happen at home and they're reported into our system, that type of communication and back and forth is moving as close to real time as we can make it. That allows us to be better and safer and more effective. It is also Cybus.ai that allows us to do all of these things that involve personalization to patients. So on the right side, you see the screenshot of what our patient app looks like. This allows patients to know what they're taking, when they're taking it, click to close, compliance checks, timers, things just to make it very easy, and it is specific to that individual patient. Also, if there's any sort of symptoms or any sort of reactivity, there's mechanisms there as well that allow to organize, communicate, and get the rest of the team involved. On the left side, you can kind of get a sense of what our AI system looks like from an EMR standpoint, where it's basically able to predict the number of visits, what's being achieved, how those individual visits are going to work, pushing a patient towards remission and then eventually deep remission. This is what we call our total system. And our total system allows us to have the high level of success, low rates of side effects, and again, that deep level of remission. And ultimately, it is this form of Cybus.ai that if you compare it to everything else out there, and I compare it here to OIT, I also compare it to other technology-based platforms. Grail is one that recently, was out there trying to screen and test for cancers that have not showed up. Initially looks somewhat promising, but then most recently, their real live data showed that they had incredible numbers of false positives, and that now makes their diagnostic capability questionable. And that I think is a concern. We have answered a lot of these questions. Is it AI powered? Yes. Do we have excellent diagnostics that have been tested and published? Yes. Do we have a specific form of biosimilar protein immunotherapy per patient? Yes. Is it forecastable treatment and forecastable as far as time? Yes. And does it result in a curative outcome? The answer is yes. So again, this is what we've been able to build and develop. And ultimately, it is this Cybus.ai platform that is going to be launched in Dr. Imam's office. As we move through this process in the next number of months, it will go live. And again, more to come for patients who are interested, but ultimately we will be moving a unique number of patients, in the North Texas area into his system. He will be conducting food challenges. His team will be conducting those, documenting effectively, using our system effectively. But our primary corporate site and our primary headquarters of command center will obviously continue to manage these patients and their system and their outcomes accordingly. So it's really a win-win on both sides. So that's something that I'm very, very proud to announce. And again, I'd say stay tuned for more details as we kind of roll this out into Dr. Imam's office. As we always do, we answer people's questions. And so we have a few questions up front that were submitted ahead of time, and then we'll try to open up to the general public. I'm going to have Dr. Imam, chime in on some of these questions as well. So first question here is, what causes food allergies and can they be prevented? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so typically I give an analogy of a car. In order to get to a car to go fast, usually you have to get your foot off the brake and hit the gas. And the foot off the brake essentially is the current environment. We're far away from kind of how humans were in the past in terms of our exposure to parasites, changes in microbiome, and that's changed our immune system's ability to regulate itself. And that's the foot off the brakes. Then hitting the gas is the other changes in the environment, such as pollution, microplastics. Kind of pick your poison. In combination with the food allergy in an appropriately genetically responsive person can initiate a food allergy response in that person. And that's essentially what causes it. It's kind of this combination of what the environment was like, how your body used to react with the past environment versus the environment currently, and then having the genetic predisposition to the food allergy. Preventing them, it's actually quite difficult. Most of the patients that we have, we didn't do anything wrong in a sense to get the food allergy. There's certain things that we have some observational studies in terms of like breastfeeding, for example, avoiding antacids earlier in life, avoiding antibiotics when they're not necessary. But for the most part, I can't really think of therapies that people did very diligently that really helped, except for possibly if they're not allergic, early exposure or considering early exposure to the food allergen might help their body learn to not develop the allergy in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, prevention is something that is definitely a big talking point now, and yet we're not seeing a lot of activity there. And I think there's also more to be learned. I mean, the early food introduction side has benefits, but my question always is the same, which is, well, I know they try to include patients who have certain criteria, but the reality is many of them are not allergic to begin with. And
Mhm.
so, or they're kind of heading in the direction of becoming non-persistent or non-allergic as they go. So, more to come on that. And it's something that I think should be built out on more data, ideally. Second opinion, why has there been an increase in severe food allergy cases over the years? I'm not sure what they mean by severe, but we could talk about it across both sides. Maybe I'll kick it off on the general side of things. I mean, we don't have an answer to this question. I mean, no one's been able to kind of pinpoint this, but my experience, and at least what we've seen on our R&D side and on the population health side, is that we are looking at very high exposure, to human immune systems now across three things. One is pollen, so pollen and the aspects of what is found in the air are having a likely impact on the development of sensitization towards certain foods. Two, patients are seeing more viruses early in life, and these viruses are hot and heavy. They're hitting people pretty hard, and that's probably driving certain immune responses in a direction that can be pro-allergic. And then three is really the types of foods that people are consuming and when they're consuming them. Go back, 30 or 40 years, people's diets were pretty limited. They did not eat a lot of things. Most people who had certain ethnic diets, they would eat certain things. That was it. Now, the world's a big place, and, everyone kind of has exposure to a lot more food at a much younger age. I think it's those combination of three things that sets up a perfect storm of the immune system going in the wrong direction. And then all of a sudden you're stuck with a long-term food allergy. I don't know if you have any comments on that, Dr. Imam.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think that there's a lot of things that people don't realize that we do get sick off more often than we used to. Where we just like how COVID spread, all the other viruses spread also. We don't call as much attention to them, but a person spends more of their life being sick, and then eating the food while being sick kind of causes this pro-inflammatory environment. And then the pollen definitely is a big factor. We definitely see that association often. We see that people with food allergies tend to have worse reactions when they also have a pollen allergy, and the pollen tends to be high.
Yeah. And then the last component is the genetics, and we don't understand that completely. But obviously, if you have a highly allergic, set of family members, sometimes things go in that direction. But more to come on that.
Mhm.
Question three is why do other allergy treatment options focus on one allergen at a time? I'll hand that one off to you.
Yeah, so I think it really comes from the idea that they're mimicking drug therapy. When you desensitize a drug, you focus on one drug at a time and you go a rapid desensitization phase, and then you try to brute force it. And they really just kind of focus on that aspect of treating the food allergy. It's easy to standardize. It's easy to teach someone else how to do, and it's easy to deploy. So I think that's the reason why it occurs in that way.
Makes sense. Do standard food allergy treatments work for individuals with pre-existing medical conditions such as celiac or Hashimoto's? That's a super specific question. I think when I hear the term standard food allergy treatments, I'm not sure that anything is particularly standardized. That's a tough one. I mean, if you're talking about Xolair, injectables, things like that. I mean, to my knowledge, the studies done on Xolair did not include patients who have celiac disease or Hashimoto's. So they were very restrictive on having pretty much people who are just allergic with not any other comorbidities. So I'd say we don't know the answer to this question. It's something that I think as a whole, food allergy-based treatments have been very much limited to individuals who have, relatively speaking, mild to moderate food allergies. And that's kind of where that's a path they've gone down. Number five, what advice would you offer to someone who's hesitant to start food allergy treatment journey due to fear? I'll hand that one off to Dr. Imam.
Yeah, that one's a little bit tough. I would really try to figure out what the fear is. So is it a fear of reaction that it depends on what therapy you choose to undergo? Is it a fear, I guess, a fear of missing out? So I guess the word fear there is kind of doing a lot of lifting. I have to figure out what the fear is. Often when we see food allergy patients, we, unfortunately, from the perspective of, a doctor doesn't really want to be alarmist, but when it comes to food allergy specifically, the faster the better. The younger they are, the more likely they're going to go into remission. The more likely it's going to go smoothly, it's going to be a lot easier. And also, the more likely they are not to remember they had a food allergy. If someone's had a food allergy for 25 years, sometimes it's hard to get them to ever want to be near the food, even if they're not allergic anymore. So, when it comes to food therapy specifically, sometimes the parents have multiple things to juggle, but kind of thinking of what is the future going to look like. And the faster it's done, the better it is. The younger they are, the better it is for the food therapy.
Agreed. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Imam. It was a great conversation.